Contact. Hey everybody, this will be the third and final segment, episode, section, whatever, on the Magna, the work I'm doing on my Magna sidecar outfit. On this one, we're going to go ahead and put the carbs in. I'll show you how you do that on these V motors, these V4s, you know, getting them into the carb holders on the cylinder heads. I'm going to show you a little bit on the valve clearance check on it, and also a carb synchronization, at least looking at what the sync is. It's kind of hard to show you the actual sync, like turning the screws, because I think I mentioned earlier they're like impossible to get to, but I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to capture a little video on that, and then we'll be done. So let's get right to it. I know I said I wasn't going to do any filming on the valve clearance check, but I am going to show you one thing on Magna. And these older bikes, you know, they have two valves in each cylinder, but only one rocker that splits out into each valve. This was a big issue from what you can read online about what Honda was trying to do back in the day to fix issues that they were having with the cams. Now, if you take a look at my cams, the cam lobes are like pristine. There ain't nothing wrong with them. I don't know if that has to do with the fact that I have the oil bypass kit on. I've had it on since I've owned it. I think this is just some goo there. Yep. So yeah, those cams are in great shape. The cam lobes are fine. I had a set that I could show you that weren't. But you know, you get the idea. If you see them all pitted or worn out, then you got a problem. So I'm liking that. Now, the Honda issued a couple of different TSBs on this, and the one that they kind of landed on ultimately was to get this right, you need two feeler gauges. And I have done this valve clearance check that way. But there is a easier way, and I've mentioned this in a previous video. Dave Dodge came up with this. I don't know if Dave's still around or anything. If he is, then definitely give him a shout out. But he's the V4 guru as far as especially the big ones, the V65s and performance and so forth. I don't know if he came up with this technique, but he certainly practiced it and published it. So this is what we're going to do. I've already loosened the jam nuts on the stem and nuts here because the left intake on number 2, this number 2 cylinder, is a little big, and the right intake on number 2 is a little bit tight. So they definitely need to be done. So what you do in this is you want 5 thou as your ultimate measurement on the valves. To achieve 5 thou, it's pretty easy. You take a 3 thou feeler and you put it between the rocker and the cam itself. Then all you do is you snug up your two adjusters till they just bottom, till they just hit the valve. Alright, so that's what we're going to do right now. I'm going to take a scrawl driver and I'm just going to tighten those till they just bottom, till they just see. You got to make sure that your jam nut is not fouling your feel on that. So make sure your jam nuts are backed off. We're going to deal with the jam nuts as a trick on how to get them tightened up here in a second. So now it just bottomed. Now we're going to do the other one. Make sure the jam nut is well backed off and just touch that down. Okay, so now they're both touching, and we've got 3 thou between the rocker and the cam lobe. All right, we got a good 3 thou. You want to wiggle this back and forth and make sure it's not tight. You want a good feel on that as well. And that's a good feel for 3 thou. All right, now go ahead and take your feeler out. Before you do anything else, go ahead and bar the motor back over until you have full pressure down on the valves from the rocker. Don't do anything with the jam nuts yet. All right, so we're going to turn the motor until essentially we are in full open of the intake cam that we're working on right there, those valves rather. So they're right about there. Okay, so now there's pressure down on them stems. So now what we can do is we can just come in here at our leisure without too much worry, and we can even use a 10 mil socket now, because what happens is when you do this, you change the angle. So instead of the valves kind of being pointed up this way more toward the, or I should say the stems and nuts toward the cam, now they're more gentle angle. You can get directly onto them. Okay, it's a lot easier to do it this way. And what that pressure does is it's going to hold those stems in place pretty much. So you can at least get somewhat of a tightening on them, all right? And I'm pretty sure you can get all of a tightening on them. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Okay, so this is a 10. Some of these are 9s. Give it a good snug, just like this. I know my hand's in the way, but you get the idea. We'll finish these off here in a minute, but we can get them pretty tight because I want to double check things first. Alright, so those are pretty tight. Now we continue to bar the motor back over until we're back at our top dead center, which in this case is the number 2 and 4 mark over here on the rotor for the alternator or the stator, whatever you want to call it. You know, the power generation system. So what we're going to do again is just bar it over until we get back to that top dead center. All right, we've got nothing in there. So the intake valve's just closed. So now we look over here to where 2 and 4 line up to the top dead center mark on the case, which is right there. Now if we did our job right, we should be exactly a 5 thou on both valves. I got 5 right here. That's a pretty good feel. And that's a pretty good feel too. We might be a skosh on the tight side. 5 thou. Oh, actually that's not bad. It's just kind of hard to get in that flimsy one. 5 and 5. Yeah, I would say it's just a skosh on the tight side of 5, but you can get 5 in, so you got a 5 thou clearance. Right? Maybe, you know, just at 5 thou, so that's okay. But it isn't terrible to get it in. All right, so I would say that's good. So you can do it this way. It takes a little practice to do the feel, get the feel of it, and I haven't done it in a while, so I'm kind of getting my feel back on it. The other 3 should go pretty well. So now what you can do is you can just leave it in this position if you so choose, and put a scroll driver in with your wrench. That way you can make sure that it's not going to move anywhere, and then give them a really good tightening and make sure they're all the way down wherever you want them. I don't know what the torque spec is on these, but I don't like to torque these. I've tried torquing them before, and I've actually stripped them out. Not on this bike, but a different one. So I just use feel because I kind of know how tight I want to get them. Oh, okay, that's tight. Oh yeah, those are tight. Oh yeah, those are good. So also, when you get them up to full torque, assuming they don't turn, you also can kind of pull that stem upwards a little bit, you know, against the thread, and give yourself a couple of tenths maybe, which just might be what the doctor orders. And so that's pretty good. I'm liking that okay. Can you see that all right? That's not bad. That's 5 thou right there. And it's the same on this side, and the feel is almost exact. So I guess that's really the take-home message here is this is one way that you can get them both exactly the same. Using 2 feeler gauges is a nightmare to get that done. So I just wanted to kind of show you this section, or this segment rather, in this next video, which will be the last video on this, when we get the carbs back in and then see how she runs. So I hope you got something out of that. Well, I'm in editing, and it turns out the entire section that I shot getting these things in before I did a final push down on them, levering them down with a bar, somehow it didn't record it. I don't know what happened, so I apologize for that. So I'm gonna have to describe it. Remember, on this one, the carb holders for 1 and 3 are actually removed, and the carb holders for 2 and 4 stay in place. So you only undo the bottom clamp when you're taking the carbs out. So what I do on these is I take the ones that are out, you slip the carbs in, and then put these back with the band clamps on and kind of angle them, all right, because this is not going to line up, obviously, because it's a V, you know, and it wants to go straight down. The only time they're directly lined up is when it's seated in or pointed directly at it when they're in the carb holders. So if you can describe, I'm going to try to describe this the way I do it. You essentially cock the carb holder up, about splitting the difference half and half of the difference in the angle, because this center of the carb is up here. When it's getting ready to go down, the carb holder is in place. It needs to go inside the carb holder before it lines up. So If you put it all the way on the cylinder head side, it's going to be way off on this one. It's going to be hitting way up top here, and it's going to be very hard to get it in. So what I do is I split that difference, as I said. I cock it on the cylinder head side, so it's a little bit angled here and a little bit angled on the carb. And then when you bring it down in, it essentially brings it into alignment as it goes through and lines itself up. That's how I do these. If you have a situation where you took all four out, you can do that as well. You can cock the front ones and split that difference too. And you can do that even on this one. I just chose not to because I can usually get them back in. These carb holders are not in the greatest shape. I really should have replaced them, but they're good enough for probably a few more years at least, and then I'll probably have to come back in here for a little scratch here, some maintenance, and I'll probably replace them at that time. So in the meantime, I'll get them in stock, but these carbs are definitely seated, as we're going to see in the next clip. But I just wanted to show you when you line it up, if you split that difference on two, if not all four of your carb holders, it'll go in easier, and then the carb holders self-align themselves. On this particular bike, the way these fronts are, you see they're pretty straight down. It's kind of more difficult to do it that way, I think, than to split the difference on both of them than it is just to do it on the rear. So that's what I chose to do. So yeah, it's definitely down all the way, and we'll see here in a little bit how it runs. But I just wanted to show you how you can line that up. I apologize, I really wish I had gotten that clip, but put it a little bit of an angle. So let's say it's 15 degrees on this side and 15 degrees on this side off, but when you bring it down, it lines it up so it's straight. I'm just working in. This side's in, the front's in. And these aren't very deep, so you may not feel like a pop, when they go in. But yeah, so you just kind of do it visually. Alright, so we're in because you can't go any further. There's a feature on the top of the carb here that wouldn't allow go any further, and likewise on the back of the head there's a there's a shoulder there on the intake side of the head. So we're good, we're in. It's just a real pain in the keister to get them in. You just got to kind of lever them in, and be careful, be gentle, don't go crazy. And once you can't go any further and they look like they're in, then they're in. So that's it. That's how I do them. Not necessarily the right way to do them. I'll show you what the other side looks like. I can get in here between the sidecars. So there's number 3. Yeah, number 3 is all the way in. These inserts that go in the head here are actually screwed in. So there's a hex on them. So we're right up against the hex. We're up against there. We're good there. I mean, I would never try to take them out, but they are screwed in. This one's going to be kind of hard with the support, but you can see that that's all the way down also. So we're good. We're just going to go ahead and tighten the band clamps, and then we're one step closer to getting her back up and running. Alrighty, folks. Everything's hooked back up. There's coolant in the cooling system, and fuel lines hooked back up. Okay, we should be good. I'm going to try just firing it up without any enricher or anything. Usually it starts that way. Okay. Oh, I know what the problem is. We're in gear. She's still filling up with fuel. Oh well, a little enricher. Come on, baby. We gotta fill this fuel with fuel. Alright, I got to run a lot better by adjusting the slow screws. But you might ask yourself, why would they be out of adjustment in the first place? Because I didn't touch them while the carbs were out. And I'll go into that here in a minute. First off, well, first thing I did was I made sure that I finished burping the cooling system so I could cap that off and be done with it for now, which is a real mess. I got coolant everywhere as usual, but that's done. So now I've got the Carb Tune Pro hooked up. And also I topped off the sub tank through the main inlet to it with fuel with just enough. No, I overflowed it, of course. And then, yeah, hooked up a Carb Tune Pro. So we're going to see where we're at in the sync. Now, again, I didn't touch any of the sync screws. I wouldn't expect it to be off a whole lot, if any. So let's find out. I don't know what's going on here. So we're off a little bit. You can see number 3 being your base carb is where it's at. It's around 20. And number 4 and number 2 are a little high relative to 3, and 1's about right. And that's because the throttle plates would be a little too closed. So I'm going to try to work on that adjustment here, and then we'll get it zeroed in. Well, that didn't work. Thought I turned it the right way. Alright, so naturally, I don't have audio on a couple of clips, so I have to reshoot this one at least to give you some catch-up. I made one adjustment on the, did I show you the, I hope I showed you the baseline. Here's the deal. I can't remember now, my clips are screwed up. Number 4 and number 2 were high. So I adjusted number 4 and number 2, which are the 2 and 4, the front cylinders here. And it's a little bit better. Let me show you where they're at. Yeah, so 1 is slightly high. Remember, 3 is actually 1 and 3 are pretty good. So 2 and 4 are still off. So yeah, I'm gonna have to play with them a little bit more. But again, you can't do it while it's running. You gotta go wide open throttling, and I'll show you what I'm doing here. You have to reach down from the inside here, way down in there for those front carbs with a really long Phillips, and then make your adjustments that way. So that's what I'm doing. You got to do trial and error on this because I don't know any other way to do this while it's running. I mean, maybe Honda has a special tool at the factory or something. I don't know. Maybe they got a test rig that they put these things on and do a flow test and adjust them that way. I don't know, but they're virtually impossible. As far as I know, they're impossible to do while it's running. So I'm just going to do it this way. All right, if you look way down in there, I know it's not easy to see, but I need a third hand to hold crap out of the way. Can't really focus it too well. It wants to focus on the closer objects. But you see those 2 screws? One is partially blocked by a linkage on the left. Those are the adjusters for 2 and 4. So that's the crap I'm dealing with here. Again, I apologize, but I cannot force it to focus down in there on a phone like this. Now, if you ever do this, and I'm not saying that this is the right way to do it, this is the way I'm doing it. If you ever do this and you lock a throttle open on a motorcycle like this, on your lift or what have you, finish what you're doing and unclamp that. Release that clamp. Don't go take a dump. Don't go take a pee. Don't eat lunch. Don't knock the bottom out of the wife. You got to do that, or otherwise you're going to forget. Then you crank it over, it's wide open throttle, and you blow your engine. It's like what Wes Johnson from Watch Wes Work says. Bolt or a critical bolt or a screw or something, like a drain bolt or something, he always tightens it right then and there. He doesn't go, I'll get that in a minute, because inevitably you're going to forget in a minute. All right, I'm going to try one more time. Throttle's unlocked. Yeah, that's good. I like it. I'll go with that. Yeah, I probably should cover that. The reason why it cranks a little bit in between startups here is this motor has a real high propensity for heat soaking. So you run it up to operating temperature and let it sit for a while. All this heat comes up and heats the carb heats the fuel and the carbs up to a certain point where it starts essentially vapor lock them. It starts that process. So if you're stopped somewhere, when I'm riding around the summer in particular, you got to go wide open throttle and then crank it, and then it'll start right up. Otherwise, it's really rich. That's one of the problems I was hoping to solve with working on these carbs here, but it always did it. Even after I first did the carb 6 years ago, it's always done it, so I didn't have a lot of high confidence. Now, okay, so two things about synchronization. You notice I had to go back on the same ones a couple of times, even after I adjusted them, and then when I flicked the throttle, they changed a little bit. So you'd have to ask yourself why. The number one reason is there's some, play and some variances in that shaft and the way the thing, the way the screw ends hit the little pads they sit on, little paddles really, and also the screws have springs on them. So when you turn a screw, remember it's sitting up against that little pad, so it's kind of compressed. The threads are pressed. Just like I was talking about when we crank these things over and put them on full opening to lock the stem on the stem and nut lifter so you can tighten the nut. Well, what you're doing there is you're turning it and there's some pressure against that pad because it's connected there, it's contacting, and you have a spring, of course, on the screw. So it's a little misleading feel. When you turn it, you say, okay, I turned it X amount of turns, like let's say 0.06 of a turn. Well, when you flick the throttle, it goes back to 0.55, for a better description of it, because that pressure is off and the spring is kind of wound, a little potential energy in there, and it pops it back. So that's why they changed just a little bit. And again, variances in the linkages. That's one of the reasons why I think, or a couple of reasons why, any service manual you have on these multi-cylinders for synchronization, they tell you to flick the throttle and then check it again and then readjust it. And sometimes you got to do it 3, 4, 5 times because, again, it just gets a little cattywampus when you turn it against that spring and the screw is up against its stop. I guess the stop would be the best description of it, the little paddle that it articulates against to create the different space there and therefore open or close the butterfly. And with that spring on there, it just wants to kind of click it back sometimes. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go get a drink of Gatorade or water or something, and come back, and I'm going to do this off camera except for the last bit of it. I'm going to finish adjusting the slow screws. Honda has a procedure for this in pretty much all their vintage, in their period, I should say, service manuals. And I dislike the procedure. I've tried it. It never works for me. It's an idle drop procedure where you screw in X amount of pilot screws until it drops 50 RPMs. Then you bring it back up till it's settled. It's a long, drawn-out process that I think just doesn't work. So I'm just going to do it by ear like I normally do. And then I think we'll finish this video up and just show you overall how it runs. Can't get it off the lift yet. I've got some more stuff to do on it. While it's in here, I'm going to take care of a couple other things. But I just wanted to show you the carb stuff as far as, what did I show you? Yeah, getting them back in, that's what it was. And tuning them, doing a synchronization, and then we'll finish this up. Okay, so it's pretty clear that all the slow screws were pretty far off. So the question is why? Didn't touch them when the carbs were out, and we just corrected a couple things in the carbs. They're pretty significant on one carb, and then, well, actually 2 carbs when you consider the holes in the diaphragm. And that kind of is the answer right there. Let me briefly explain what I'm talking about. Over a period of time, naturally I've done some adjusting to this when I hear it running a certain way. And so I fiddled with the slow screws. Not very often, but once a year, something like that perhaps. And I haven't done any work on these carbs in 6-7 years now. So what I've essentially been doing is adjusting it to compensate for problems in the carbs. Now once the problem is corrected, or the problems, plural, are corrected, then we have to reset our slow circuit, as far as the fueling goes, because now it's the rest of the carb is fueling properly. The fuel level in the float bowls is proper. The diaphragm, I was going to say diaphragmatic, that's kind of more medical. The diaphragm action is correct on the slides, and so we have to adjust the slow screw essentially back closer to normal. Now it's never going to be like factory normal because the engine's got, you know, internal wear. But, you know, what is factory normal? As lean as they could at that time because they needed to meet certain EPA standards. But that in a nutshell is why, even if you don't touch the slow screws and you go through your carbs, which of course you should do if you're going through a carb that's all full of gunk. But in this case, same scenario, and you go through the carbs, you don't touch them. You're going to need to reset them once you correct some other fairly significant problems. So that is the reason why in summary. I got a little leaking fuel line issue I got to deal with, but we're going to keep it there. I can attune these, adjust these slow screws. They're on the sides of the carbs, no problem with a screwdriver at any time. So I'm going to run it for a while and then probably fine tune it. When you rev it like that and it drops down and idle a little bit and then comes back up, it indicates that it's a little on the rich side for that. But if I lean it out anymore, it wants to bog when I crack the throttle any faster than just a slow roll. So that tells me that I got to still find that you know, sweet spot. But it's okay. It runs a lot better. Definitely picks up real quick now compared to before. Before I was having trouble with it just being real anemic when you crack the throttle. So clearly the slides was the problem in that, and probably some other stuff like the float and so forth that we found in these carbs. But overall, I'm happy with it. I'll take care of this tomorrow because I'm running out of time here today. And it'll be fine. I got a few more things to do on it, as I said before. Cleaning up a couple things that I found, little doodad things, just some housekeeping things mostly, more than anything else. And then I'll get her all back together, get off the lift, and take her for a test drive, which I'm not going to film. It's kind of hard to do that on this bike, on this setup. But I just kind of wanted to show you the carb installation and the tuning, a little bit of information on the on how to do the synchronization on these V4s, and that's about it. Yeah. All right, so that's it on this third and final segment of the Magna work. I hope you enjoyed everything. You got something out of each video. I'll tell you right now, if you're working on one of these old V45s, getting the carbs out and back in is a royal pain in the ass. Even when you're experienced at it, it's a royal pain in the ass. There's just a lot of operations you have to complete before you can get those things out. And then that individual operation is in itself a pain in the ass. So just be prepared to learn a few new adult language potty mouth words. In fact, I'd recommend going on a website and looking up some new words that maybe you haven't even heard of before. Just make sure the kids are not in the garage with you. If they're in the house, don't talk too loud. And if your wife is upset when you swear, then make sure she doesn't hear it either, because you're going to do some cussing. There's no question about it, getting this in and out. So anyway, as I said before, if you like what you saw, don't forget to do what you need to do. And you already know what that is with the subscribe, the notification bell, the like and share. And we'll catch you on next video. Thanks again for watching.